Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service. Today presenting the April 17th, 2026 new moon chart for Washington, D.C. It happens at 7:51 and 30 seconds on April 17th. So it's an AM new moon. So when you wake up and you start your day, you're going to be heading into a new moon. The new moon occurs at 27 degrees of Aries, 29 minutes. So a lot of times people will say 27 to 28, but it's 27:29. Now, I do want to talk about, first of all, as in my notes, because I have notes again, we have a huge cluster of Aries point, not Aries point, the sign of Aries uh, configuration. So you've got Neptune in Aries, you've got Mercury in Aries, you've got Mars in Aries, you've got Saturn in Aries, you've got Chiron in Aries, you've got the Sun and the Moon both in Aries. So a lot of times, and many astrologers will talk about this, that they'll talk about how this is a cluster of Aries and that it's going to make us all a little bit more active and it marks new beginnings for the year. And I'll agree with all that, okay? But I also think we need to look at the Aries energy, which is what's in the notes here. It's this is a strange month because it's really about activation. Okay, so things are going to be activated during this time period. Okay, during this time, and there's a couple of things here that we'll be looking at. Like, for example, look at this Saturn and Mars. Okay, ironically, no matter what system you're looking at, they are an aspect of one another. So they're less than 2 degrees, 30 minutes away. And so a lot of things that will be going on would be forced. There's a lot of frustration, possible explosions. Okay. But I'm going to talk about the explosions because they're really, if you notice, at 25 degrees of Libra, which means opposing Chiron, opposing the sun and moon, is Zeus. And Zeus is the war, okay, or war. And that's why when they said, ceasefire and all of that wonderful stuff last week, I knew there's no way because the war is literally a part of the new moon chart. It's one of the ways in which astrologers work, okay? And so I'm going to go with no on that. It's going to have a stop and go energy. Well, it's already started because we're in a ceasefire and then we won't be. Okay. It's just the way it is. It's about people wanting to act out. You really want to do something. But Saturn says no, no. And it could be not so fast, which is you might be able to do it down the road, but not right now. So there's a couple of little caveats with that. So the result of what will happen between those energies is that it's going to be like a compressed, forced action. And it's kind of like a release event. It compresses so much it begins to ooze. Okay. Now, basically what we're looking at is, I like the way the AI put it, something has to give. Okay. Something has to give. Yeah, with all that Aries energy, usually that is how it can manifest. Okay. And because what's happening is everything is so visible. And it's really interesting because I listen to a lot of podcasters, both political and tarot readers and psychics. And I'm into all of that. I actually listen to podcasts like some people listen to music. But I can tell you that in the Aries point or in the Aries axis at all, okay, everything becomes visible. We're going to talk about exactly what's in the Aries point, but realize that even with all of this energy coming off of the Aries point, but in Aries itself. Now remember that Aries has 2 points. It has the 2230 and it has the 0 degree point. Okay, that's Aries points. Okay. And basically, there's a lot of feeling of pressure. Okay. And it's interesting because they're putting, the AI is putting, now I would have probably stopped with Mercury and Neptune, which is the lying. I don't know that I would have gone as far as Mars Saturn, but they're doing a Mars Saturn because Mars Saturn is also a midpoint, believe it or not, on the sun and moon. Okay, interesting. And they do equate out to the Aries point. It's a math thing, and I'll show you when we get to the midpoints. And so now we're seeing a public manifestation of the pressures, probably because the public is also under pressure, visible breaking points, and actions that will force things out into the open. Now, we're talking about DC, but please be aware that these are effects that are occurring regardless of where you live, okay? So this is energy that you could feel within your own chart, particularly if you have an amplification or an accent on the Aries point within your chart. Okay. And a lot of us do. And that's why I say that. So that's something for us to consider going forward. Now, here's where I would have put more emphasis, which is Neptune. Okay. So Neptune is still at 2 degrees, still sitting really rather close to that Aries point. Okay. And there's because of the Mars Mercury, look at this. See this? Look, 2, 3 to 5. All right. Like, wow, wow, wow. Because that 3 to 5 is also really pushing an aspect here. Now it's a little wide by a few minutes, but it's still really in effect. And also the Mercury and the Neptune they're singing, they're playing. Okay. And what happens with that, especially with that Neptune there, is look for things where we misjudge an action, or we're acting on unclear information, or there's confusion that's driving our decisions. These are things we need to be aware of. There can be emotional or reactive behavior. Now, yeah, this will be going on in DC. And, I was listening to Gary, which I do every week. I don't take the class because it's really at an inconvenient time. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the timing, we'll just put it there. And one of the things that he talked about was the fact that, and this is true because I'm an astrologer, astrologers get better at their craft by following the news. Okay. Now, we don't have very good news. All right. We really do not. But then isn't that what Neptune is up here telling us? That you're not getting the news, that there's a deception going on. Okay, now Poseidon is now out of the Aries point, but it's retrograding back to the Aries point, which is again that idea of propaganda. Okay, with that said, that concept of Neptune definitely affects us in our decision-making process. So basically, weak judgments will lead to consequences, and pressure and confusion often pushes people to action, but the action won't necessarily be the right actions to take. So situations can tend to escalate due to those miscalculations, and reality tends to hit after the action. So think about that, guys. When you rush to judgment and then you go, oh my God, I'm so wrong. Okay, there is so much possibility of doing that in this particular month that I would almost say to you, hey, follow the news. Let those guys make those wild decisions and accusations. Try not to have them happen or occur in your own life. The story here, and this is just that little bit that I've been reading for us, talks about how this new moon forces action under pressure, but the action will not be fully informed. We keep talking about it. People act because they have to, not because they're ready to. And because of that, consequences will have a tendency to very quickly follow along. Okay? Now, this is a very internally frustrating chart. People will feel blocked. I can tell you right now, clients do. They're just stuck at the moment. Impatient overrides logic right now, and reactions will replace strategies. Want to be really careful of that, particularly in our own personal lives. So here we go with it's action, exposure, and then consequences. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of frustration and pressure themes. There'll be a lot of impulsive, reactive behavior. There'll be a lot of confusion, deception involved. And I'm going to get into that deeper when we do go into those asteroids in the Aries point, okay? It's all about public exposure too. A lot of stuff happens out in the world. So even within your own life, a lot of what is going to happen will happen within your greater world, not necessarily within your personal world, although the personal world could become more known to the outside world. So we have action under pressure, think times when you just can't wait anymore. It's like a breaking point, new moon. It really, if I had to put something on it, and I might, I think I'm going to put a title on this one. I think I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to call it the breaking point, new moon. So it basically, it's, you think, oh no, this is supposed to be about new beginnings. And I'm not going to say it's still not going to lead to new beginnings. I just don't think the road to the new beginning is that direct. Okay, so as I move on, I want to look at, I know we've been doing a lot of work with, and before I move into that, let's do the 360 dial. I'm going to do sun and moon stuff first, but and I'm going to point it out even here first. I'd like to just take a moment, and I want you to note that in this initial Aries point, now the other Aries point has some stuff, there isn't a lot of action here, basically the nodes. And that means that we're going to be making new connections on a personal level, maybe even as a country, but we're still going to be oppressed by either those new connections or the ones that we already have. But you see, there's nothing. Look at the dots. They're a little bit far from anything within the exception of the nodes. And that is how we read Uranian, okay? I'm going to very briefly just point out that the other Aries point, the real Aries point, the midheaven Aries point, we're going to talk about a little bit that ascendant that is now affecting the midheaven and Pluto. Okay, so I'm going to get into that in more detail, but I want to point out that your ascendant midheaven is kind of like your place in the world. And I think that when we look at this as a DC chart, it's Washington's place in the world and how that is transforming. Not necessarily for the good, because it's happening right there, but it's happening also in the midheaven. So it would be like saying the ascendant midheaven equals Aries, our place in the greater world, okay? But it's also ascendant Pluto equals Aries. The world is watching us transform. But you can look at this as ascendant Pluto equals Aries, but also the midheaven Pluto is a very close conjunction, meaning they have an aspect. So, but you can see again, there's not a lot on this chart. Now, I did pick up some in Solar Fire. We will look at them. Some of that has to do with the fact that the asteroids are more available for those axes. They are not in the Uranian programs. Okay, I mean, even if I told you where they were, I'd have to put them all in and work it out. Now, just because I do want to start here. And if you notice, already there is more action. Okay, because now we've got Venus to Mercury and Venus to Neptune. We've got Sun and the Moon hanging out with Chiron. Okay, so I just wanted you to see all this, all right? And those of you who are astrologers but not Uranian astrologers, I did regular astrology first, of course, but I have to tell you that the amount of information, even as an asteroid astrologer, that you can pull out of a 360 dial is amazing. I'm actually working on a book right now, and don't get excited. I don't know how long it'll take me to do. I already have a couple hundred pages of notes. I'm doing it with the assistance of AI, but I can tell you that it really those asteroids, when I start looking at them in Uranian, is when they pop and when I can get the details of these illnesses that I'm looking at. So it's really important. So here's what we've got. Okay, so I'm not going to do much more with this particular program. I do want to talk about this because I mentioned it. That is huge. It's the military. It's the and it's not to the Aries point. So this is, you know, just the war that's going on and how Chiron it is. Okay, so Chiron is an alternative. Chiron is also the wounded teacher. So Chiron has a lot to offer. One of the things is healing, not without tears, but healing. The other thing, so that I'm popping, okay, so when I go back here, because it's a 360 dial, let me see, here it is. I got to be able to do this. Okay, so right now we're at 27 degrees, 29 degrees of cardinal, okay? Over here, because it's in, so this would be as well, very close to that, which it is. Okay, so the dial works different here. All right, now, if I go, and you know what, here we go. Let's take this to the other, let me do that. Let's take it, because it's so much harder to explain in this. Well, I could go to a dial here, but again, I'm missing a lot of my stuff that I would like to point out to you. But you can see how different it is, because now when I do this, it equals 12 degrees of Gemini. Okay, so we go from, and it's going to be 29 degrees as well. Okay, so 27, 29 to 12, and I moved it 29. Okay, there we go. I'm just like messing around here to try to get it to the minute. But you get the idea, okay? And I'm going to go through all of these when I get to the next software. The other points would be 58, which would be about here. No, that's 15, right? Yeah, oh no, that's it. 1958. I'd still have a few more. Um, there we go. All right. So you see how that works. 19, back to 19. Now I'm at 18. There's 19. And so it's hard for me to get to the minute on this one. It's easier in the next program. But you can see how it now has pulled in several other aspects. Up here, it would be 4 degrees of cardinal, 58 minutes. So I'm going to do this all again. So let's take this information and take it on to our next chart. Okay, I'm hoping that my chart doesn't get cut off too much when I'm doing the broadcasting. So I'll probably have to check that later, the top and the bottom. I'm trying to make it size. But I got my buttons to work again, so it seems like I get one thing going and a few other things break up. So here's the chart itself. And just to be aware, the Sun, Moon, and Chiron and everything else here in the 12th house. Okay? As you can see, just as we were looking at before, except for now I have all of my stuff here. I'm not going to take the time as I've been going through. I can tell you that the rest of the world sees us as a bully, and maybe I should tell you that because of the 21 degrees Taureau on the descendant. And why? Because of the way we just go about doing things without thinking it through, without talking to anybody. So it's just like just doing it. And how, how important the propaganda is that led us here. So I think that we already know all that. I'm not going to put a whole lot of emphasis on any of that, simply because I want to go on with this chart. I think it's really important. I do want to pay attention to things like, notice how Pluto is running with Juno. And what that means to us, the common man, is a lot of power struggles within our partnerships. So this could be people who are struggling with the person above them, person below them at work. It could be partnerships, literally your relationships where people are butting heads. So there's a few things that could bring that up. Now, what I really wanted to do was pick up where I left off, which is here. Okay, so you see, we do have a lot of midpoints, but they're not obvious. Okay, in the other one, and you have to go to a 90 to really. That's where everything gets to the finer points. Like for example, Neptune and Pallas. We would have never picked that up because Pallas is not one of the things I can pull up on that software. We missed the Zeus Adamitos, though, which let me explain what Zeus Adamitos is. And it's really important if it hits in your chart, if you have an Aries point chart or something in your chart that hits the Aries point. I was reading for somebody this week and doing an astrology reading, and they got Zeus Adamitos. I myself have Zeus Adamitos in the chart, okay? What it means is we're beginning something that's big, okay? Okay, so you think of Zeus Adamitos and you think of the ceasefire. Well, that can be a Zeus Adamitos because a ceasefire is the stopping or the blocking of Zeus. But Zeus is, besides explosions, guns, and all those other things, it's also seeds. Seeds, like new beginnings, okay? And Adamitas is the ground. So you've got seeds in the ground. It's the beginning. It's a slow building. It's a build, a slow build. The irony is I got it on the fact that I'm writing a book, which I didn't know I was doing until I got really into the work and the AI said it was too big for a lecture, that it was a book. It is a book. And with Zeus Adamitas, it means that I am doing something of that nature. I'm just giving you that as an example because I think there's many of you out there who are beginning, just like my client. She's not writing a book, by the way, but her work is very important. And so it has to do with her work. And for many of you out there, it may have to do with your work or, again, what you're doing in the greater world. So if you are thinking about something that seems almost impossible to do, like write a book, okay, it's funny because, somebody asked me at the book, I said, no, you wouldn't even, it's astrology. I'm not writing a novel. Okay. So the reality of the size of what it is you're doing might seem overwhelming and undaunting at the moment, but my feeling is that you're still going to do it. And that's just the way it is. So I did want to talk about that. That was really important to get out there. Now, and that I did not see when I was doing the Iranian section myself. But boy, does it show up here. So I do want to say that. Now, I do want to talk about the sun-moon midpoint. So let's get here to 27. Okay, that's the Chiron, so it's the next one. Okay, and I do want to go to the minute. So we're going to go back to 29, as you see it popped up there. There you go. Okay, so it's exact now. And with that said, look how close it is to Black Moon Lilith. Now, Black Moon Lilith is interesting. Okay, let me give you some examples. In the United States chart, the fact that they've been acting like a rogue nation. In some cases, it would be a rogue individual. It's always associated with single women, but I think it's just because that is an old-fashioned way of looking at it. I think anybody who makes people kind of question things, is a bit of a rogue in some way, is also going to be equaled by this Black Moon Lilith. Okay? My book is on asteroids. Well, in the astrology world, asteroids themselves are Black Moon Lilith. So here we go again with, you got to open up your meanings sometimes in order to understand. And that's one of the reasons why I like asteroids, because it gives you the backup information and the details. So as we move on here, we're looking at Mercury, Venus. Okay, I'm going to read them off. I did both arms, and I'll go to the second arm in a minute. Mercury, Neptune. We've got Mars is hit by this point. Mars is up here. Look, there it is. Actually, that's Vulcan. But Mars, here it is also hit, okay, because of where it is. And Saturn Poseidon. So I think it's an inconjunct. I think that's how I would put that, or a quincunx. The Saturn Poseidon, Aries ascendant, Mercury Mars, Pluto Admetus. And remember, the Mercury, the ascendant to Aries is that coming out, and everything's noticeable in public. Okay, with that, we're looking at things like our perception, our mind with Mercury Venus, Mercury Neptune, and Mercury Mars. Okay, so yeah, right away you're like, okay, you get all this stuff going. So there's going to be a lot of thought, a lot of feeling, a lot of reaction, a lot of communication that will ultimately drive events. And perception will not be stable. Okay. And this is due to the Mercury Neptune, which is a distortion, confusion, and can often be misjudgment. I live with that on a day-to-day basis. I have a square there, so I was a great liar as a kid. It's one of the things I abhor now. I can't stand lies now, but that is a distortion when you have that Mercury Neptune. The speeches will impulsive and be reactive, so you can look forward to stuff like that. You can notice that people are acting on unclear or incorrect information, and that the emotional reactions right now will tend to override logic. Logic is not big right now, okay? And words have so much importance right now. So we also have a lot of pressure, and that's the Pluto Admetus. Okay, so here we've got intense compression. We've already talked about it, unavoidable force. And then it's a buildup that ultimately releases itself. The Sun, Moon, Mars, Pluto Admetus is an explosive release after the pressure is it's going to be like a tea kettle. Situations reach a breaking point and events will feel unavoidable. Saturn Poseidon is a reality, a restriction on reality. Poseidon does equal, and the truth is important right now. Truth, clarity, higher understanding. But again, think of Saturn coming to Poseidon, which is all of that propaganda has to be restricted. And I think that's true. It is the point where truth meets reality. I think this is when we all start to realize that we're done with the propaganda. Truth is so important. It becomes unavoidable. Now, that is our basically our sun and moon midpoints. What we're looking at too is because of the Aries ascendant, which actually shows up in the Aries ascendant, okay? It actually does. All right, let me go to 5. This is where the Mars is going to show up too. Okay, it's actually 558. All right, there's still Mars. Okay, sorry, wrong way. There we go. So we're going to 558. There we go. So Mars isn't going to show up there, but it is close enough to this point to be an aspect. And then there's your 1958 fix. And there's your Vulcanus node, there's your Pluto Admetus, which I spoke about, and there's the Neptune Saturn. Vulcanus node is also the amount of pressure that's being put onto us by our connections. Okay? And that's where Mars comes in because that's in aspect. Here we are going to now talk about basically your perception is unstable, your action is triggered anyway, pressure builds and releases, truth overrides illusion. That's the good news. Everything becomes visible. More good news. Okay? So it's a really, I think it's the midpoints in this particular situation are even more important than at other times. And it's going to take precedence over the Aries point, which is why I spent so much time on it. Things all happen at once. Nothing is going to be able to be hidden. And the truth will definitely take over reality. And this is going to happen even if it's in your personal life, your job, whatever. It's going to happen. It's Aries, okay? And it's the sun moon. People feel pressure. they react quickly and they don't fully understand what's going on. Then reality sets in. Okay, react first, understand later would be another good title for this particular new moon. Perception deception. Now I'm going to go into the asteroids. Okay, this is the way that I have the AI doing it right now so that we can learn them better. So in the area of perception deception, we've got Laverna, Jacobson, and both of those are swindle type bodies. Laverna can be a literal thief, and Jacobson, as we know, is a con man. All right. We also have a lot of pressure intensity, and that's going to come in through the Vulcan, which I just went through that Vulcanus node, and the Admetus related themes, which we talked about, Zeus Admetus. Truth, correction. Isn't it interesting that I had all the information? The AI says, no, I think it's a book. Okay. Wow. We're all going to have a little bit of that. Veratus is the truth. Varda is the truth that sets you free. They are both in these axes. Okay. And it's all public exposure because of the Aries point highlighting this particular point, because the Aries point does show up in the sun moon points. It shows up through the ascendant. So it comes in. This is a breaking point. This new moon is driven by misjudgment, pressure, forced action. What happens and what will happen over the next 4 weeks will not be able to stay private. Good news is the truth follows right afterwards. Okay, so that's like that was a summation more of the midpoints, but I'm going to be adding even more. They did give you some asteroids. I'm going to give you more. Eros, Mine, Magdalena, Academia, Shiva, I can talk, Actor, which are both retrograde. Lee is retrograde. Hippocrates is retrograde. Clotho is retrograde. Lax, Fisher, Poseidon, the asteroid, checks, and the asteroid Schmidt. So it basically is talking about how this is going to be adding to the Mercury-Neptune theme and the Pluto-Admetus theme, as well as the Saturn-Poseidon theme, okay? So in this, we're looking at, and also Chiron is here, Melancholia, Child. I mean, there's a lot, actually. Phaethon, Photographer, Henderson, Peo, Laplace, Eros. So that's when I pick up what I left at the top. Okay, so let's go through what they mean. Here's what we're doing with the AI, and I hope this helps you to understand. And this would be really great. You can give me feedback on this. We have wound, healing, and vulnerability. All right. These are the asteroids that emotionally expose us. Our psychological pain can be resurfaced through these asteroids, and it can cause for some of us a healing crisis. But it's also highlighting those midpoints. Chiron, which is that wounded healer we've talked about. Melancholia, which is to be a little depressed. Hippocrates, which is a medical asteroid. Magdalena, which is there's a couple of different ways to look at Magdalena, but again, it's about wounding and vulnerability. She is vulnerable. Okay. Then we have innocence, naivety, and development. Child, Clotho retrograde, that's the beginnings. Now, the fact that it's retro means that you might have to begin it and then it's not quite right, and then you have to begin it again, and the word lax. So it's not fully developed right now. It's kind of inexperienced overall, and so it's not working as well. So it's like acting before you're ready. So one of the things I like about being an astrologer is the repeatable themes. These are the things that are highlighted in this chart. There's loss of control through overreach, through Phaethon and Actor. And this is people that act beyond their capability. It's about losing control of a situation and a false presentation that can collapse. And that means actions equal consequences. Our perception, image, and reality filters are going to kick in with photographer, mean, Lee, Cech, and Schmidt. Now, photographer and mean. Photographer is obviously pictures. Mean is often what things appear like or look like. And Lee is from the internet. And Cech is, again, our check on things. And Schmidt is, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. So a perception, what is our perception? Well, we can't really 100% count on it. Schmidt's there. Interpretation is how things are seen, the framing, the image, the perception, and the narrative versus the reality. So again, Mercury, Neptune. What we see is not necessarily facts. Desire and attachment through Eros, which feeds the Mercury, Mars, and it's a strong emotional, desire-based motivation. And there we go again, acting from a place of passion, not logic. Knowledge systems and thinking can be seen with academia, Laplace, and Henderson. Now, Laplace is lies. That's like misinformation, okay? So what we're learning are misinformation, and Henderson is actually an antisocial asteroid. It's like we pull ourselves out of certain things. So Mercury, Neptune, again, is that distortion. Then we have truth, spiritual, higher order through Poseidon, the asteroid, which acts a lot like Poseidon, the trans-Neptunian, and Shiva, retrograde, which is withdrawal. But in Shiva, what we're looking at is a destruction of something in order to rebuild it. We've already started. The destruction has been ongoing. We need to rebuild it, whatever it is, okay? Truth is trying to emerge, and the spiritual awareness, the waking up as it's called, is happening. But it's going to be delayed, oftentimes internalized before it actually comes out, and often it will be after the event. Resource, survival, and real-world consequences, again, Fisher. Now, Fisher to me is lies. So I would definitely say that people will be lying as a survival instinct. People will be lying because they don't know what to do next. So look for that. There's a situation driven by vulnerability and an incomplete understanding of what's going on. This will lead to actions that are taken beyond one's capabilities. These are all the asteroids put together. So the first grouping, the situation, the emotional vulnerability, and incomplete understanding is Chiron, child, and lax. Whereas the leads to action is Phaethon, an actor, which is retrograde. Based on distortion, perception, or misjudged reality. Well, that's like not seeing what things look like, Mercury, Neptune, and it's motivated by desire or emotional impulse. In other words, we do this because we're like so excited. There's your arrows, okay? Now, as I move to this chart, I'm moving into now the Aries point. So I do want to point out that the sun moon was a lot greater this time than the Aries point. Sometimes the Aries point, most often, I would say, the Aries point has been, recently anyway, very much active compared to the sun moon. But this time it's the opposite, okay? So what we're looking here is that in the Aries point, we have the nodes, already pointed that out. We have the ascendant midheaven, already pointed it out. We have ascendant Pluto, already pointed out. Saturn Poseidon, Neptune Pallas, Zeus Admetus, ascendant Admetus. Mars ascendant, Saturn Apollon, Cupido Vulcanus, Cupido midheaven, Jupiter moon, Jupiter sun. These are midpoints formed by the Aries point, okay? So in the collective public activation, okay, is where we're going to start with the nodes, the ascendant midheaven, the Cupido midheaven, the Jupiter sun, the Jupiter moon, and Saturn Apollon. These are the first ones we're going to start with. So here we have mass response, public visibility, collective participation. It's like an amplifier. Everything I just said, amplify. Yeah, it really does. And so whatever's going on doesn't stay intimate. It's like, bam, it's out there. Power, intensity, and irreversibility will be the next set of midpoints. Your ascendant Pluto, your ascendant Admetus, your Zeus Admetus, and your Cupido Vulcanus. Okay, and I've talked about literally all of them. So you see this pressure is building within the environment and the collective force behind it, so that situations that cannot be easily reversed. It's like all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, this has been done. What do we do? Whatever's going on now has become public. Action trigger points would be that Mars ascendant, which means that we need immediate action, visible reaction, and events that are triggered quickly. We're going to all watch it in real time. Strategy versus confusion. Well, you've got Neptune Pallas here. So the planning was poor. They misjudged the strategy, acting without clear understanding. This is a direct mirror of Neptune, Mercury equals Sun, Moon, which means this Neptune Pallas is not just in the air out there. We're going to see it through the actions of the United States, which is true, but you're also going to see it in your interactions with some of the people in your lives, your connection, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Neptune. Did I really hear that person say that? The next one is truth, reality, and exposure, starting with Saturn, Pluto, and then we have Saturn, Apollon. Yeah, Saturn, Poseidon. I was going to say, wait, there was no Saturn, Pluto. No, it's Saturn, Saturn, Poseidon. Remember that stopping of the disinformation. I just think people are getting smarter. Saturn, Apollon can be stopping within a business, and that would also fit that Shiva that we were talking about in the last, because that's things that could stop in order to correct them or rebuild them. Reality meets truth, exposure on a large scale, and systems that will be forced to reveal themselves. This is when the truth becomes more visible to the collective. I've been hearing I listen to a lot of psychics, and I've been hearing a lot, even the astrologers are saying about how things are really going to start coming out. Wow, this chart highlights this to the nth degree. So basically what we have with the Aries point is collective pressure that builds, action is triggered and quickly visible. Action is based on flawed or unclear strategy. The result is powerful, irreversible events, and the truth becomes visible to everyone. I really do like that the truth is coming. So now, when you put all this together, you really do have this pressure to create an action and the emotional reaction of that. And it all manifests in a mass response, visible consequences, and public manifestation, which is really true. It really does. People are going to act from places of confusion and pressure. That action becomes public and collective, and the outcome forces the truth into the open. So it doesn't, I mean, it's really clear what's happening here, okay? That, individuals will feel pressure and then they're going to react. The reaction will spread to the collective. The collective will then amplify. The consequences then intensify, and the outcome, the truth, is unavoidable. I love seeing that. Okay. Now, we're going to have a lot of group dynamics with this. We're going to have a lot of what I want to call powerful forces that come to play when it comes particularly to truth and deception, and then about the misjudgment and planning errors. Okay, so it shows that individual actions taken under pressure, especially with imperfect clarity hanging over their heads, becoming collective with powerful events that then become visible. Okay, that's the midpoint analysis. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to the very last thing we're going to be talking about, which is the asteroids at the Aries point. We've got Sly, Credo, Pan, as in the devil, Victoria, Liliputina, Dionysus, Nostalgia, South Node, Varda's retrograde, Sophia, which is a sense of knowing, Lust, Industria, Delius, the North Node. Remember, the nodes are really important. Volcano, which acts a lot like Volcanus, and bam, something's hidden. Okay, this is a very alive and very public Aries point. Okay, it already locks into the story that I've already been creating for you. So we have our deception, cunning, and distortion asteroids, Sly, Delius, and Pan. Because Sly is sly. Delius is clever. Now, Dalius can be good too, don't get me wrong. But when it runs with Dalius, Dalius runs with Sly and Pan, not so good. Okay? This is trickery, clever maneuvering, illusions, confusion, panic, strategic, but not always honest. And it directly goes back to the midpoints of Neptune Pallas and Mercury Neptune again. I'm going to find that Mercury Neptune is just a star. The next we have belief, truth, and ideology with Credo, Sophia, which is that knowing. Varda, even though it's retrograde, maybe delayed, but it is truth. What people believe versus what is true. Wisdom, trying to emerge. Truth delayed, but it's still there. And then truth comes through correction. So that kind of works with that Saturn, Poseidon we've already talked about. There's an excess, impulse, and loss of control with Dionysus, lust, Pan. So Pan plays two roles, okay? So overindulgence, acting on desire, an emotional, instinctive reaction, okay? So it's like we're reactive. We're not logical. We're not thinking. And here we go again, reaction before thought. The outcome win-lose dynamics is that there is success, victory, Victoria, but often after conflict. Someone wins and someone loses. There are wins for us here. There is no doubt about this. But they're going to also be talking a lot about winning. They've already started. Karmic faded pathways with the nodes and nostalgia. And here what we're looking at is past patterns that keep repeating. And the one thing that we're here to do now today in this evolved state that we find ourselves is to stop the past patterning. So karmatic situations resurface and movement forward through the consequences. So in other words, we're going to trip up on our own patterns. Then we're going to have to change them. And that's all of us. This is huge. We've seen this before, but now it resolves. So now it's like everything's like a pimple reaching ahead. Work systems and real world output. Yeah, it's about being productive. It's about the consequences of the actions and how it affects productivity, the economy directly. Power, force, and eruption would be volcano and bam, bam, is a sudden release of force, explosive events, and immediate manifestation of those explosive events. Okay. Then we got this small versus large on the distortion scale. Lilliputian is also things that will be done that will be a little too small, a little too late. Should have done that sooner, and you should have done it in a big way. Okay. So it's also about that misjudgment again, that you got to watch that one. Situations are driven by distorted perceptions or manipulation, and people are acting from a belief, desire, or an impulse rather than what's really going on here. And that's something for us all to consider. So let me go through the master list for the asteroids here. Okay, that'll, I think, make it a little bit easier. So we're talking about situations that are driven by distorted perceptions and or manipulation with Sly, Dalius, and Pan, as we have already discussed. People act from belief, desire, and impulse rather than clarity when you're talking Credo, Dionysus, and lust. Credo, lust, and Dionysus, yep. And old patterns resurface, creating karmic turning points. And this is where the nodes come in. And the nostalgia. Events escalate quickly through volcano and bam, and the outcome forces a resolution, like someone wins and something changes with that Victoria. Truth and wisdom emerge only after all the events unfold. And that's where you see that Sophia, that sense of knowing, and then Varda, again, being retrograde. So you have at a collective level, when you put everything together with the Aries point, you have the situations that are driven by perception, belief, and sometimes manipulation. People act quickly, often impulsively, and those actions will immediately become visible. These are not new situations. They are tied to past patterns that are reaching a turning point. Once events are set in motion, they escalate quickly and force an outcome. Only after that do we begin to see the truth and the clarity. So this is a really, really interesting time that we're going to be going through. It's really, I think it's one of those things where uh, we have gone through a lot. We have learned a lot. But it's almost as though something's going to happen that's going to help us to see it all very clearly, and it'll set us all up on a better path. And then we can really begin to utilize that Admetus, Zeus, those new beginnings. The new beginnings that start by planting seeds in the ground, just like we're doing. It's spring. With that said, I will leave you with, as I always do, I hope that you have only happy readings until we meet again. Thank you for watching the video, and if you would, comment, like, share. It's not as big a deal for me as others because I'm not an SEO channel, but who knows, I could change that at some point in the near future. Take care, people. See you next time.